Picture this. You're sitting at a mahogany dining table that costs more than most people's cars, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and oil paintings worth millions. The silence is so thick you could cut it with the sterling silver knife in your trembling hand. And then, the most powerful man in the room, a billionaire who controls media empires and politicians, leans forward, looks you dead in the eye, and says the words that will change everything forever. You're nothing but street garbage in a borrowed dress. The words hit like a slap across the face, not just because of their cruelty, but because of what they represented. Here was a young black woman who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through college, who had clawed her way up from nothing, being reduced to trash by a man who had never worked a day in his life for anything he owned. But here's the thing about underestimating someone who's had to fight for everything they've ever achieved. Here's the thing about trying to break someone who's already been tested by life in ways this privileged man could never imagine. What happened next in that dining room didn't just shock everyone present. It didn't just turn the tables. It completely shattered the foundation of a billion-dollar empire and exposed secrets that would make headlines for months. And if you think you know where the story is going, trust me, you don't. Now, before we dive into this incredible journey of love, betrayal, and the most satisfying comeback you'll ever hear, I need you to do something. Don't just sit there quietly consuming this story. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because stories like this, stories about ordinary people standing up to extraordinary power, these are the voices that need amplifying. And your subscription helps ensure these stories reach the people who need to hear them most. But let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months before that devastating dinner. Back when Maya Johnson was just another face in the crowd, working herself to exhaustion, completely unaware that she was about to fall in love with someone whose family would try to destroy her. Maya's alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., the same jarring sound that had been pulling her from dreams for the past 3 years. Dreams of a different life, where she didn't have to choose between buying groceries and buying textbooks. Where her biggest worry wasn't whether her beat-up Honda would make it through another week. She rolled out of her narrow bed in the studio apartment she shared with 2 other struggling students, her feet hitting the cold linoleum floor with practiced silence. Her roommates were still asleep, and Maya had learned the art of getting ready, without making a sound. 20 minutes later, she was out the door, heading to her first job of the day. The early morning shift at Riverside Community Center meant serving breakfast to homeless families, wiping down tables, and restocking supplies before her 8 a.m. journalism class. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid part of her tuition, and more importantly, it reminded her daily why her education mattered. Every face she served breakfast could have been her own family just a few years earlier. Her mother had cleaned office buildings for 20 years to keep Maya and her younger sister fed and housed. Her father had left when Maya was 12, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. So when Maya earned a partial scholarship to study investigative journalism, it wasn't just about her dreams. It was about proving that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. After her morning shift, Maya rushed across campus to her advanced media ethics class, sliding into her usual seat in the back row just as Professor Martinez began his lecture. She was exhausted, but she took detailed notes anyway, knowing that every piece of knowledge could be the difference between landing a real journalism job and serving coffee for the rest of her life. It was during the lunch break that everything changed. Maya had exactly 47 minutes between classes, which meant grabbing a quick sandwich from the campus cafe and finding a quiet corner to review her notes for her afternoon constitutional law class. She was balancing her tray, looking for an empty table, when someone gently bumped into her from behind. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The voice was warm, genuinely concerned. Maya turned around to see a tall man with kind brown eyes and slightly messy dark hair, wearing a simple sweater that probably cost more than her rent, though she didn't know that yet. "It's fine, really," Maya said, noticing how he immediately moved to steady her tray even though nothing had spilled. "Are you sure? I wasn't watching where I was going. I was reading this article about investigative journalism ethics and got completely absorbed." He gestured his phone, and Maya caught a glimpse of the headline she recognized from her own research. The Washington Post piece about source protection? Maya asked, surprised. Most students she knew barely kept up with celebrity gossip, let alone dense journalism ethics articles. His face lit up. "You read it too? What did you think about their argument regarding public interest versus privacy rights?" And just like that, Maya found herself in the kind of intellectual conversation she rarely had outside of class. This stranger, who introduced himself as David, had thoughtful opinions about media responsibility, asked genuine questions about her perspective, and listened to her answers like they actually mattered. They talked through her entire lunch break. When Maya realized she was about to be late for class, David quickly asked, "Would you maybe want to continue this conversation over actual dinner sometime? Somewhere with better sandwiches?" Maya hesitated. She had exactly 2 decent outfits suitable for dates, approximately $37 in her checking account, and a schedule that barely left time for sleep, let alone romance. But something about David's genuine curiosity and the way he listened to her thoughts made her say yes. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant near campus. David had suggested it, saying he'd heard the food was great, though Maya suspected he'd chosen it because it was affordable without making it obvious he was being considerate of her budget. Over pasta and cheap wine, they talked about everything. Their career dreams, favorite books, childhood fears, and the kind of deep topics that usually take months to explore with someone new. Maya learned that David worked in business development for a tech startup, that he'd grown up on the East Coast, and that he had complicated feelings about family expectations. David learned that Maya was 1 semester away from graduating with her journalism degree, that she worked 3 part-time jobs to support herself, and that she had an infectious passion for uncovering truth and holding powerful people accountable. What Maya didn't learn, what David carefully avoided mentioning, was that his family's business interests included owning controlling stakes in several major media companies, that the complicated family expectations involved pressure to take over a multi-billion-dollar empire, that his full name was David Harrison Montgomery III, and that his great-grandfather's picture hung in the lobbies of newspaper buildings across the country. David didn't mention these things because he'd learned early in life that his family name changed how people treated him. Some people became suddenly deferential, agreeing with everything he said and laughing too hard at his jokes. Others became suspicious, wondering what he wanted from them. He'd been craving a genuine connection with someone who saw him for who he was, not what he represented. Their second date was a walk through the downtown art district, stopping at galleries and small museums. Maya was embarrassed that she couldn't afford the entry fee to the Contemporary Art Museum, but David smoothly suggested they skip it in favor of the free sculpture garden instead. They spent hours talking about art, politics, and their dreams for the future. By their third date, Maya realized she was falling for someone who challenged her intellectually, supported her ambitions, and made her laugh until her sides hurt. David was falling just as hard for someone who saw the world with fresh eyes, who fought for what she believed in, and who treated him like a regular person worthy of both affection and playful teasing. 3 months into their relationship, David still hadn't mentioned his family's wealth. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because these months with Maya had been the most honest, authentic months of his entire life. She liked him for his terrible jokes and his habit of bringing her coffee during her late-night study sessions. She respected his opinions while challenging them when she disagreed. She was building something real with David the person, not David the heir to billions. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when you're building something real. The truth started to emerge during their 4th month together. Maya noticed that David never seemed worried about money the way she constantly was. He offered to pay for dinners without checking his bank balance first. He owned expensive gadgets, but claimed they were gifts. When her car finally broke down for good, David casually offered to loan her money for a replacement. Talking about a few $1,000s away, Maya talked about a few 20s. "David," Maya said one evening as they walked back to her apartment after dinner, "can I ask you something?" "Always. What exactly do you do for work? I mean, specifically, you've been kind of vague about it." David was quiet for several steps. Maya could practically see him wrestling with something. "It's complicated," he finally said. "That's what you always say. Look, I don't care if you're not making millions or if your job is boring. I'm just curious about this part of your life that you never really talk about." David stopped walking and turned to face her. Under the streetlight, Maya could see conflict written across his features. "Maya, there are some things about my background that I haven't told you. Not because I wanted to lie to you, but because I wanted you to get to know me first. The real me." A cold feeling settled in Maya's stomach. "What kind of things?" "My family, they're wealthy. Very wealthy. And they have expectations about who I should be dating, who I should marry, how I should live my life. I've been putting off introducing you to them because I know they'll be difficult." Maya stared at him. "How wealthy are we talking about?" David ran a hand through his hair. "The kind of wealthy where my last name is on buildings." The silence stretched between them. Maya was processing not just a revelation, but what it meant. The careful restaurant choices, his casual attitude toward money, the expensive clothes he downplayed as old things. It all made sense now. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because I knew it would change things. People treat me differently when they know. And these past months with you have been the most normal, honest relationship I've ever had. Maya looked at this man she'd been falling in love with and realized there was an entire world attached to him that she knew nothing about. A world that, based on his obvious anxiety about her reaction, might not welcome her. "So what happens now?" she asked. David reached for her hands. "Now, if you're willing, I'd like you to meet my family. My grandparents are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary next month, and the whole family will be there. It's going to be intimidating, and some of them will probably be awful to you, but I want you there. I want them to meet the woman I'm in love with." Maya's heart skipped at the word love. They hadn't said it yet, but the context made her stomach churn with anxiety. "What if they hate me?" she asked. "Then that's their problem, not ours. Maya, I don't care if they approve, but I care about being honest with you, and I care about you being part of my whole life, not just the parts that are easy." Standing there under the streetlight, Maya had a choice to make. She could protect herself by walking away from a relationship that was about to become infinitely more complicated, or she could trust that what they'd built together was strong enough to survive his family's judgment. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned those office buildings with her head held high, who had taught Maya that dignity came from within, not from other people's opinions. She thought about all the times people had underestimated her because of where she came from, and how she'd proven them wrong through sheer determination and hard work. "Okay," she said, "I'll meet them." David's relief was palpable. "Really? Really? But David, I need you to promise me something. Don't try to change me to fit their expectations. I am who I am. I work 3 jobs. I live in a studio apartment. And I'm proud of how hard I've worked to get where I am. If that's not good enough for your family, then we'll deal with that together." David pulled her into his arms right there on the sidewalk. "I love you exactly as you are. And anyone who doesn't see how incredible you are doesn't deserve to be part of our lives." As Maya kissed him back, she felt a mixture of love, determination, and growing apprehension. She had no idea that in 3 weeks, she would be sitting at that mahogany table, facing the worst moment of her life. She had no idea that the man holding her now came from a family where power was everything and outsiders were seen as threats to be eliminated. But she was about to find out. And before we continue with what happened when Maya entered David's world, I want to remind you about something. These stories, the ones about real people facing impossible situations and finding the courage to stand up for themselves, they're too important to be buried in algorithms. That's why we started a newsletter where we share the deeper stories, the ones that don't make it onto YouTube, the follow-ups and behind-the-scenes details that complete the picture. Sign up for that newsletter in the description below. Because Maya's story is just beginning, and what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about power, privilege, and the price of standing up for yourself. The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper so thick Maya could barely fold it. Embossed gold lettering announced the 50th wedding anniversary celebration of Harrison and Eleanor Montgomery, requesting the pleasure of company at their estate in the Hamptons. Maya stared at the formal language and felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was an event. "David," she called from her tiny kitchen, holding the invitation like it might bite her. "What exactly am I walking into here?" David emerged from a cramped living room where he'd been attempting to study on her second-hand couch. "It's just a family gathering, I promise. My grandmother insisted on the fancy invitations, but it's really just dinner and some speeches. This says black tie optional." Maya's voice was getting higher. "I don't even know what that means. Is it optional or not? And if it is black tie, I definitely don't have anything appropriate." The panic was setting in. Maya had been to exactly 3 formal events in her entire life. Her high school graduation, her sister's wedding at the local community center, and a journalism awards banquet where she'd worn a borrowed dress from Goodwill. The idea of walking into a room full of billionaires wearing the wrong thing made her want to cancel immediately. David sat down beside her, taking the invitation from her trembling hands. "Hey, look at me. It's going to be fine. Black tie optional means you can dress up, but you don't have to wear a ball gown. Something nice is perfect." "Something nice," Maya repeated. "David, my something nice is a dress I bought at Target for my college interview 3 years ago." "So we'll go shopping," David said simply. Maya shook her head. "I can't let you buy me clothes. That's not who I am." This was the conversation David had been dreading. How do you navigate the practical realities of dating someone from a completely different economic class without making them feel diminished or bought? How do you help without hurting their pride? "What if we compromise?" David suggested carefully. My sister Simone is about your size, and she has more formal dresses than she could wear in a lifetime. She's also the nicest person in my family, and would love to meet you beforehand. We could visit her, and if she has something you like, you could borrow it. Maya considered this. Borrowing from his sister felt different than David buying her something. More like what friends do for each other. Would she really be okay with that? Maya, Simone has been begging me to bring you around for weeks. She's dying to meet the woman who has me completely smitten and apparently talks back to me regularly. 3 days later, Maya found herself standing outside a brownstone in Manhattan's Upper East Side that was probably worth more than she'd earned in her entire career. David had warned her that Simone lived comfortably, but this went beyond comfort into a realm Maya had only seen in movies. Simone Montgomery answered the door herself, and Maya immediately understood why David had described her as the nicest person in their family. She was petite with David's same warm brown eyes, wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater that she somehow made look casual and welcoming. You must be Maya. Simone pulled her into a hug before Maya could even introduce herself. I'm so excited to finally meet you. David literally cannot shut up about you. It's gotten nauseating, honestly. Simone, David warned, but he was grinning. What? It's true. Last week he spent 20 minutes telling me about how you corrected some professor's interpretation of First Amendment law and how brilliant your argument was. I was like, David, I don't even know what the First Amendment says. Please stop. Maya laughed despite her nerves. He told you about that? He tells me about everything you do. It's sweet and also deeply annoying. Simone linked arms with Maya and led her inside. Come on, let's find you something gorgeous to wear so you can knock the socks off our stuffy relatives. Simone's walk-in closet was larger than Maya's entire apartment. Dresses hung in organized sections by color and occasion, with shoes arranged like a boutique display. Maya felt overwhelmed until Simone started pulling options and talking her through each one. This one is too formal. You'll look like you're trying too hard. This one is beautiful, but the wrong color for your skin tone. Oh, but this... Simone held up a midnight blue dress with a classic silhouette. This would be perfect. Maya fingered the fabric. It was the softest thing she'd ever touched. Are you sure you don't mind me borrowing it? Mind? Maya, that dress has been hanging there for 2 years waiting for the right occasion. Besides, David told me you're studying investigative journalism, which means you're basically training to be a professional truth teller. Anyone willing to dedicate their life to holding powerful people accountable deserves to look absolutely stunning while doing it. As Maya tried on the dress, Simone kept talking, and Maya began to understand why David had wanted them to meet. Can I give you some advice about the family dinner? Simone asked while adjusting the dress's fit. Please. I'm terrified. Most of them are going to love you. My grandparents are genuinely wonderful people who care more about kindness than status. My mother is, well, she's complicated, but she's not cruel. A few of the cousins and their spouses might be snobby, but they're not important. And David's father? Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Simone's expression grew serious. My father is difficult. He believes very strongly in tradition, in maintaining certain standards, in protecting what he sees as the family's interests. He's going to test you, Maya. He tests everyone who gets close to our family. Test me how? He'll ask questions designed to make you feel small. He'll bring up your background in ways that sound polite, but feel like insults. He'll watch how you react to see if you're someone who can be intimidated or dismissed. Maya's stomach clenched. What if I fail his test? Simone turned Maya toward the mirror. The midnight blue dress transformed her completely. She looked elegant, confident, beautiful. Here's the thing, Simone said, meeting Maya's eyes in the mirror. My father's test isn't about whether you're good enough for this family. It's about whether you'll let him make you feel like you're not. The right person for David is someone who knows their own worth regardless of what anyone else thinks. And based on everything David's told me about you, I think you already know yours. 2 days before the dinner, Maya's anxiety reached a breaking point. She called her sister Carmen, who was 3 years younger but often seemed wiser. I can't do this, Maya said, pacing her tiny apartment while Carmen listened patiently. What am I thinking? Walking into a room full of billionaires. I'm going to say something wrong, use the wrong fork, embarrass David and myself. Maya, Carmen's voice was calm and firm. Do you remember when I was 16 and wanted to drop out of high school because the other kids made fun of my clothes? That's different. Is it? You told me that people who judge others based on what they wear or where they come from aren't worth impressing. You said real class comes from how you treat people, not from how much money you have. Were you lying to me then, or are you just scared now? Maya stopped pacing. Carmen was right, of course. She was scared, but not of using the wrong fork. She was scared of being rejected by people whose approval she was starting to realize she wanted, despite herself. I love him, Carmen. I love David so much it terrifies me. And if his family hates me, then you'll deal with it together. Maya, you've been fighting for everything you wanted your entire life. Don't stop now just because the battlefield is fancier. The night before the dinner, David came over with takeout Chinese food and found Maya cleaning her already spotless apartment for the third time that day. You're spiraling, he observed, setting the food on her small table. I'm not spiraling. I'm preparing. You've organized your bookshelf by author, publication date, and what appears to be your personal rating system. That's spiraling. Maya looked at her books and realized he was right. I'm scared, David. Really scared. David pulled her down onto the couch beside him. Tell me what you're most afraid of. That they'll take one look at me and decide I'm not good enough for you. That they'll find some way to convince you they're right. Maya, David's voice was serious now. I need you to listen to me carefully. There is nothing my family could say or do that would change how I feel about you. Nothing. If they can't see what an incredible woman you are, that's their loss, not ours. But they're your family, and you're the person I want to build a life with. My family's approval would be nice, but it's not required for our happiness. Maya leaned against David's shoulder, feeling some of her anxiety ease. Promise me something. If I completely embarrass myself tomorrow night, you'll still love me afterward. I promise to love you no matter what happens tomorrow night. But Maya, you're not going to embarrass yourself. You're going to walk into that room and show them exactly why I'm crazy about you. The morning of the dinner, Maya woke up before her alarm, her stomach churning with nerves. She spent extra time on her hair and makeup, tried to achieve the kind of effortless elegance she'd seen in magazines. When David picked her up that evening, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than her semester's tuition, he stopped in the doorway of her apartment and stared. Wow, he said softly. Maya, you look absolutely beautiful. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours, and Maya spent most of it trying not to wrinkle Simone's dress or smudge her lipstick. David kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling funny stories about family vacations, clearly trying to keep her distracted. There's something I should probably mention, David said as they turned onto a long private road. The house is big. How big? Bigger than you're probably expecting. Maya was expecting big. She was not expecting the sprawling estate that emerged from behind a wall of perfectly manicured hedges. The main house looked like something from a movie about English aristocracy, with actual turrets and what appeared to be a separate wing just for entertaining. Cars were already parked in the circular drive, luxury vehicles that Maya recognized from commercials but had never seen in person. David, Maya said faintly, this isn't a house. This is a compound. I know it looks intimidating, but I promise the people inside are just people. Wealthy, sometimes difficult people, but still just people. Maya took a deep breath, smoothed down her borrowed dress, and tried to channel every confident woman she'd ever admired. Okay, let's do this. The front door was answered by an actual butler, which Maya had somehow not prepared for. He led them through a foyer with marble floors and a staircase that belonged to the museum, toward the sound of voices and clinking glasses. David, darling. An elegant woman in her 70s approached them with arms outstretched. This had to be David's grandmother, Eleanor, and Maya immediately understood why David had described her warmly. She had kind eyes and a genuine smile that reached them. Grandma, I'd like you to meet Maya Johnson. Maya, this is my grandmother, Eleanor Montgomery. Mrs. Montgomery, it's such an honor to meet you, Maya said, offering her hand. Eleanor ignored the handshake and pulled Maya into a gentle hug instead. Please call me Eleanor, and the honor is mine, dear. David has told us so much about you. I understand you're studying journalism. Yes, ma'am. I graduate next semester. How wonderful. Journalism is such important work. We need more young people willing to ask difficult questions and hold people accountable. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. I have a feeling you're going to be very good at that. Maya felt some of her tension ease. At least one member of David's family seemed genuinely welcoming. Come, let me introduce you to everyone, Eleanor continued, linking arms with Maya. Harrison, come meet David's young lady. David's grandfather was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, and the same warm eyes as David and Simone. He shook Maya's hand with both of his and asked thoughtful questions about her studies and career plans. Within minutes, Maya found herself in an animated discussion about the role of local journalism in democracy. "You see, Harrison," Eleanor said to her husband, "I told you she was smart. David always was attracted to intelligent women." Simone appeared at Maya's elbow with a glass of wine. "How are you holding up?" "Your grandparents are wonderful," Maya said quietly. "I told you they would be. Now, let me introduce you to the cousins before my mother commandeers the conversation." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Most of David's extended family was polite, if somewhat formal. A few were genuinely warm and curious about her background. One cousin's wife made a comment about how refreshing it was to meet someone so down-to-earth, which Maya suspected was meant as a compliment but felt subtly condescending. David's mother, Patricia, was exactly as Simone had described. Complicated. She wasn't openly hostile, but Maya could feel herself being evaluated, measured against some invisible standard. Patricia asked careful questions about Maya's family, her education, her plans for the future, in a tone that suggested Maya might not have any. "And what do your parents do, dear?" Patricia asked during a lull in conversation. "My mother works in commercial cleaning, and my father isn't really in the picture," Maya answered honestly. She decided beforehand that she wouldn't apologize for her background or try to make it sound more impressive than it was. "I see." Patricia's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "How industrious, your mother." Maya bristled at the tone, but kept her voice even. "Yes. She's worked very hard to support my sister and me. I'm proud of her." "Of course you are," Patricia said smoothly, and somehow made Maya feel like being proud of her mother was naive. It was then that Simone appeared with another family member Maya hadn't met yet. "Maya, I'd like you to meet my Uncle Robert." "Uncle Robert, this is Maya Johnson, David's girlfriend." Robert Montgomery was Patricia's brother-in-law, a man in his 50s with the soft look of someone who'd never miss a meal he couldn't afford. His handshake was limp, and his eyes immediately began assessing Maya in a way that made her skin crawl. "So you're the young lady who's captured David's attention," Robert said, his tone suggesting this was somehow suspicious. "Simone tells me you work several jobs while studying. How ambitious." Again, a compliment that felt like an insult. "I do what I need to do," Maya replied simply. "And what exactly do you plan to do with a journalism degree? I understand the industry is quite challenging these days." Maya recognized the question for what it was. A suggestion that her chosen career was impractical, that she was naive to think she could make something of herself. "I plan to hold powerful people accountable for their actions," Maya said, looking Robert directly in the eye. "I think there's more need for that kind of journalism now than ever." Robert's smile became sharper. "How idealistic. I suppose when you're young, everything seems possible. I suppose when you believe in something, age doesn't matter," Maya replied calmly. David appeared at her side, sensing tension. "Uncle Robert, I see you've met Maya. We should probably head to dinner soon, shouldn't we?" But Robert wasn't finished. "I was just asking Maya about her career aspirations. It's fascinating how young people today think they can change the world with a laptop and determination." "Determination has got me pretty far so far," Maya said, her voice still calm but with an edge now. "I'm sure it has, though I imagine it helps to have connections." Robert's eyes flicked meaningfully to David. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger. Here was this soft, privileged man suggesting that her relationship with David was somehow strategic, that she was using him for advancement. "Actually," Maya said, her journalism training kicking in, "I didn't know about David's family background for the first 4 months we dated. I fell in love with him because he's kind, intelligent, and treats people with respect. Qualities that don't require money to develop." The temperature around their small group dropped several degrees. Robert's expression hardened. "How refreshing," he said, echoing his wife's earlier comment, but with none of pretended warmth. It was at that moment that the butler appeared to announce dinner, and Maya realized with growing dread that she hadn't yet met the one family member everyone seemed most worried about. David's father hadn't made an appearance yet. As they moved toward the dining room, Simone caught Maya's arm. "You handled Uncle Robert perfectly," she whispered. "But Maya, my father just arrived. He's been in meetings all day, which means he's probably in a mood. Just remember what I told you about knowing your worth." Maya nodded, but her stomach was churning again. If David's uncle was this challenging, what would his father be like? She was about to find out. The dining room was even more intimidating than the rest of the house, with a table that could seat 20 people and place settings that included more forks than Maya had ever seen in one place. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over floral arrangements that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Everyone was taking their seats when he walked in. David's father didn't just enter a room. He commanded it, tall and imposing with graying hair and sharp features. He wore authority like an expensive suit. Conversation stopped as he surveyed the gathering, his eyes cataloging every person present before landing on Maya. Those eyes, cold, calculating, and completely unlike his son's warm brown ones, assessed her from head to toe in a way that made Maya feel exposed despite her elegant borrowed dress. "So," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room, "you must be David's friend, not girlfriend, not the young woman we've heard so much about. Friend." Maya stood as he approached, extending her hand with as much confidence as she could muster. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm Maya Johnson. It's a pleasure to meet you." He looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it briefly. His grip was firm but cold, a handshake designed to establish dominance rather than welcome. "Indeed," he said simply, then moved his seat at the head of the table without another word. Maya caught David's eyes across the table. He looked tense, worried, and slightly angry. Simone gave her an encouraging nod. Eleanor smiled warmly, clearly trying to offset her son-in-law's coldness. As the first course was served, Maya tried to focus on the conversation around her, but she could feel David's father watching her. Every time she used her fork, every time she spoke, every gesture was being noted and evaluated. She was being studied like a specimen, under a microscope, and Maya had the growing, horrible certainty that she had already been found wanting. The first course passed in relative peace. Maya focused on eating carefully, participating in conversations with Eleanor and Simone, and trying to ignore the weight of David's father's gaze. His name, she learned from context, was Charles Montgomery, and everyone at the table seemed to defer to him even when he wasn't speaking. It was during the second course that he began his interrogation. "Maya." Charles's voice cut through the pleasant conversation about Eleanor's garden. "David tells me you're studying journalism." Every head at the table turned toward them. Maya set down her fork carefully and met his eyes. "Yes, sir. I graduate next semester." "And where exactly are you planning to practice this journalism?" There was something in the way he said the word that made it sound distasteful, like he was discussing something unsavory. "I'm hoping to work for a newspaper or magazine focused on investigative reporting," Maya answered. "I'm particularly interested in stories about corruption and accountability." A slight smile played at Charles's lips, and Maya realized with growing dread that he found her answer amusing. "Corruption," he repeated. "How fascinating. And what makes you think you're qualified to determine what constitutes corruption?" The question was designed to make her feel presumptuous, but Maya had spent 3 years learning to research and defend her positions. "I think corruption is fairly well defined, sir. When people in positions of power abuse that power for personal gain or to harm others, that's corruption regardless of who identifies it." "I see. And you believe you'll be able to support yourself financially pursuing these idealistic stories?" Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I believe important work is worth doing regardless of financial rewards." "How noble." Charles's tone made nobility sound naive. "Of course, it's easy to be idealistic when you don't have real responsibilities, when someone else is handling your practical concerns." The implication was clear. He was suggesting that David was supporting her financially, that her principles were a luxury she could only afford because someone else was paying her bills. "Actually, sir, I've been financially independent since I was 17. I worked 3 jobs while attending school full-time." 3 jobs. Charles repeated this like it was somehow distasteful. "How? Industrious. And what sort of jobs are these?" Maya felt the trap closing around her. There was no way to answer this question without highlighting the gap between their worlds. But she refused to be ashamed of honest work. "I serve breakfast at a community center. I tutor students in writing, and I work weekend shifts at a local bookstore." "A community center?" Charles mused. "Serving food to the homeless, I assume?" "Among others, yes." "And you enjoy this work?" "I find it meaningful, yes." Charles nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "Tell me, Maya, what do you think about the problem of dependency? People who rely on handouts instead of bettering themselves." Maya's heart began to race. This was dangerous territory, and she knew it. He was trying to get her to criticize the very people she served breakfast to every morning, to distance herself from poverty by condemning it. "I think," Maya said carefully, that most people who need help are dealing with circumstances beyond their control. Job loss, illness, domestic violence, mental health issues. I've found that most people want to work and support themselves when they're given the opportunity. How generous of you to make excuses for them. I don't think providing context is making excuses, sir. Charles's eyes sharpened. Maya realized she just contradicted him directly, something that probably didn't happen often. Context, he repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Tell me, Maya, do you think there might be a difference between temporary assistance and enabling long-term dependency? Maya felt like she was walking through a minefield. Every answer could explode in her face. I think that's a complex issue that requires understanding individual circumstances rather than broad generalizations. Individual circumstances. Charles set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair. You know, Maya, I've built several companies from the ground up. I've created thousands of jobs and generated billions in economic activity. In my experience, success comes from personal responsibility, hard work, and making smart choices. Do you disagree with that? Here it was. The moment Maya realized what was happening, Charles wasn't trying to have a conversation with her. He was trying to force her into a position where she would either have to criticize her own background and the people she cared about, or appear to dismiss the value of hard work and success. It was a rigged game, and Maya finally understood that she couldn't win by playing by his rules. I think success means different things to different people, she said quietly. And I think there are many kinds of valuable contributions that don't necessarily generate billions in economic activity. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Maya could see David's tension from across the table, could sense Eleanor's discomfort, could practically feel Simone willing her to stay calm. Interesting perspective. Charles said finally, though I have to wonder if that attitude might be limiting in terms of real-world achievement. I think my real-world achievements speak for themselves, Maya replied, and immediately regretted the defensive tone that had crept into her voice. Charles pounced on it. Of course they do. Tell me, what would you consider your greatest achievement so far? Another trap. If she mentioned her grades, her scholarships, her journalism awards, he could dismiss them as academic exercises without real-world value. If she mentioned her work, he could characterize it as menial. If she mentioned supporting herself financially, he could point out that she was still a student living in a studio apartment. I'd say my greatest achievement is becoming someone my mother can be proud of while staying true to my values, Maya answered. For the first time, Charles's mask slipped slightly. He hadn't expected that answer. Your mother, he said, who works in cleaning, I believe David mentioned? Maya's blood began to boil. He was going after her mother now, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give Maya opportunities. Yes, sir. She's worked in commercial cleaning for 20 years to support my sister and me. 20 years. And she never aspired to anything more? The question was poison wrapped in silk. He was suggesting that her mother lacked ambition, that cleaning was somehow beneath aspiration. My mother aspired to raise 2 daughters who understood the value of hard work, treating people with respect, and fighting for what's right. I'd say she achieved those aspirations. Charles nodded as if this confirmed something distasteful. How touching. Family loyalty is admirable, of course, though I sometimes wonder if excessive loyalty to our origins can prevent us from evolving. Maya stared at him. He was suggesting that loving and respecting her mother was holding her back from becoming someone better, someone more like him. I don't consider respecting the woman who raised me to be excessive loyalty, sir. Of course not, though I imagine as you continue to expand your horizons, you might develop a more nuanced perspective on these matters. The condescension was breathtaking. He was suggesting that she would eventually outgrow her working-class values and embrace his worldview as she became more sophisticated. David finally spoke up. Dad, maybe we could? David, please. Maya and I are having an interesting conversation. Charles turned back to Maya. I'm curious about your perspective on social mobility. Do you believe people can truly transcend their circumstances, or are we all ultimately products of our environment? Maya saw the trap clearly now. If she said people could transcend their circumstances, he would suggest she was doing so by dating David. If she said people were products of their environment, he would use that to dismiss her potential. I believe people can achieve remarkable things regardless of where they start, but I don't think that requires rejecting or being ashamed of where they come from. Shame, Charles repeated thoughtfully. Who said anything about shame? I'm talking about growth, evolution, the natural process of becoming more than what we were. And I'm saying that becoming more doesn't require becoming different from the people who shaped us. Charles smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Tell me, Maya, when you imagine your future, your career, your lifestyle, your social circle, do you see yourself returning to serve breakfast at community centers, living in studio apartments, associating primarily with people from your current background? Maya felt like she was drowning. He was forcing her to choose between ambition and loyalty, between success and authenticity. I see myself doing work that matters and maintaining relationships with people I care about, regardless of their economic status. How idealistic. And if you had to choose, if success in your career required moving in different circles, adopting different standards, leaving certain associations behind. The cruelty of the question took Maya's breath away. He was asking her to admit that success would require abandoning her mother, her sister, her friends, her values. I would never consider any success worth that price, Maya said firmly. Charles leaned forward slightly. Never is a strong word, Maya. People change. Priorities evolve. What seems important at 22 might seem limiting at 32. Some things don't change, Maya replied. Some values are negotiable. Values? Charles mused. Or limitations disguised as principles? Maya felt something snap inside her. This man was attacking everything she held sacred. Her mother's dignity, her own integrity, the idea that love and loyalty were strengths rather than weaknesses. I think we have very different definitions of what constitutes a limitation, she said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. Charles's eyes glittered. Indeed we do. You see, Maya, I've spent 30 years building this family's influence and reputation. I've created opportunities for my children that most people could never dream of. And I've learned that sometimes protecting what matters requires making difficult choices about who belongs in our world and who doesn't. The threat was barely veiled now. He was telling her directly that she didn't belong, that she was a threat to what he'd built. I understand, Maya said quietly. You're concerned that I'm not good enough for your son. I'm concerned, Charles corrected, that you represent values and priorities that are fundamentally incompatible with this family's interests. The table had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Maya could feel every eye on her, could sense David's barely controlled anger, could practically hear hearts beating around the table. And what interests are those? Maya asked. Charles sat back in his chair, completely comfortable with the confrontation he'd orchestrated. Discretion, loyalty to family above all else. Understanding that some circles require certain standards of behavior and association. The wisdom to know when personal desires must give way to larger responsibilities. He was asking her to accept that she was inferior, to agree that David's family obligations should override his feelings for her. Maya took a deep breath. Every instinct told her to be diplomatic, to find a way to defuse the tension. But looking at this man who had spent the last hour systematically attacking everything she valued, she realized that diplomacy would only validate his belief that he could intimidate her. Mr. Montgomery, she said clearly, I respect your concern for your family, but I think you misunderstood something fundamental about me and about your son. Charles raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting pushback. You seem to think I'm here because I want something from your family, money, status, opportunities. You're wrong. I fell in love with David before I knew anything about his background, and I would love him if he lost every penny tomorrow. Maya could see David's face across the table, could see pride and love and something else, relief that she was finally fighting back. You also seem to think that success means abandoning the people and values that shaped us. I disagree. I think real success means staying true to yourself while achieving your goals. Charles's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And finally, you seem to think that intimidation and condescension will make me realize I don't belong here and walk away quietly. Maya's voice was getting stronger. You're wrong about that too. The silence stretched taut. Charles stared at Maya with something that might have been surprise or might have been anger, and then he reached for his wine glass, took a sip, and smiled the coldest smile Maya had ever seen. Well, he said softly, at least we understand each other now. Maya had the horrible realization that she'd just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the country. But before she could process what that might mean, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. A server approached to refill wine glasses, and Maya, still shaking from the confrontation with Charles, reached for her water glass at the same moment. Her elbow knocked into the server's arm, and red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, across Charles's shirt, and onto the cream-colored carpet that probably cost more than Maya's entire education. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stared at the spreading red stain in horror. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, let me help clean." She started to stand, reaching for a napkin, but Charles's voice stopped her cold. "Don't." One word, spoken quietly, but with such authority that Maya froze halfway out of her chair. Charles looked down at his wine-stained shirt, then at the ruined carpet, then directly at Maya. When he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely devastating. "How perfectly appropriate," he said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear clearly. "I should have expected this from someone who doesn't understand how to behave in civilized company." Maya felt like she'd been slapped. "Sir, it was an accident." "Was it?" Charles interrupted. "Or is this exactly what happens when you try to put street garbage in a borrowed dress and pretend it belongs at a respectable table?" The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Street garbage. In a borrowed dress. Maya heard Eleanor gasp, heard David Sharpen take a breath, felt the shock ripple around the table. But all she could focus on was Charles Montgomery's cold, satisfied expression as he delivered the cruelest insult she'd ever received. He hadn't just called her names. He'd reduced her trash, dismissed her borrowed elegance as a costume, suggested that her very presence contaminated their refined world. For a moment, Maya couldn't breathe. The words hit her like physical blows, targeting every insecurity she'd carried into this room. She was street garbage. She was wearing a borrowed dress. She didn't belong here. Charles had won. But here's what Charles Montgomery didn't understand about Maya Johnson. Here's what he couldn't have known when he delivered what he thought would be the killing blow. Maya had been called worse things by better people. She'd been underestimated, dismissed, and attacked by men who thought her background made her weak. And every single time, she had proven them wrong. Charles Montgomery was about to learn why underestimating Maya Johnson was the biggest mistake of his very powerful life. Before we continue with what happened next, and trust me, what happened next will shock you, I need you to pause for just a second. Look, I know cliffhangers are annoying, but here's the thing. This story is about to take a turn that most people won't see coming. Maya is about to do something that will change everything, not just for her and David, but for Charles Montgomery's entire empire. But stories like this one, stories about regular people standing up to corruption and power, they don't get told if people don't support them. So before we see Maya's response to the most humiliating moment of her life, hit that subscribe button, because what she does next needs to be seen by everyone who's ever been made to feel small by someone who thinks money makes them better than everyone else. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Maya stood there, wine stains spreading across her borrowed dress. Every eye in the room fixed on her, waiting to see if Charles Montgomery had finally broken her. Maya took a deep breath, then another, and then something remarkable happened. She smiled, not a forced smile or a nervous smile, but a genuine, almost amused smile, as if Charles had just told her something mildly entertaining rather than delivered the cruelest insult of her life. "Mr. Montgomery," Maya said, her voice clear and steady, "you're absolutely right about one thing. This is a borrowed dress." She gestured to the beautiful midnight blue gown that Simone had lent her, now stained with red wine. "It belongs to your daughter, actually, who was kind enough to lend it to me because she wanted me to feel welcome at your family gathering. Which, now that I think about it, says something beautiful about the kind of person you raised, despite your best efforts to teach her that someone's worth is measured by their bank account." Charles's confident expression flickered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. Maya continued, still standing, her voice gaining strength. "You're also right that I come from the streets, in a way. I come from neighborhoods where people work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, where mothers like mine clean office buildings at night, so their daughters can study during the day, where people know the value of a dollar because they've had to fight for every single one." She looked directly at Charles, no longer intimidated by his wealth or his contempt. "But here's what you don't understand about people from the streets, Mr. Montgomery. We learn to recognize garbage when we see it, and it has nothing to do with how much money someone has." Eleanor gasped softly. David was staring at Maya with something approaching awe. Even Simone looked stunned by Maya's composure. But Maya wasn't finished. "You see, I may be wearing a borrowed dress, but I know exactly who I am underneath it. I know that I earned every opportunity I've been given. I know that I've never had to buy respect or intimidate people to feel important. And I know that when I look in the mirror, I see someone my mother can be proud of." Maya's eyes swept around the table, taking in each face. Can everyone here say the same thing? Charles's face was darkening, but Maya pressed on. You asked me earlier about corruption, about what qualifies me to identify it. You want to know what qualifies me, Mr. Montgomery? 3 years of investigative journalism training. 3 years of learning how to research, how to verify sources, how to follow money trails, and uncover the truth that powerful people want to keep hidden. Something cold settled in Maya's stomach as the words left her mouth. She was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. You want to know what else qualifies me? 6 months of wondering why my boyfriend was so nervous about introducing me to his family. 6 months of digging into why a man who claims to care about discretion and family values would be so worried about his son dating someone with integrity. Charles went very still. The kind of stillness that predators show right before they strike. Maya, David said quietly, a warning in his voice. But Maya had passed the point of caution. Charles Montgomery had spent an entire evening systematically trying to destroy her confidence, attack her values, and humiliate her in front of people she cared about. He had called her street garbage. He had suggested she was using David. He had gone after her mother. It was time for Charles Montgomery to learn what happened when you attacked an investigative journalist who had nothing left to lose. You see, Mr. Montgomery, journalists have this habit of asking questions. And when someone works very hard to make you feel inferior, you start to wonder what they're hiding that makes them feel so threatened by an ordinary person like me. Maya reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out her phone. So I asked some questions. I did some research. I followed some very interesting money trails. Charles's face went white. You have no idea what you were. Don't I? Maya's voice cut through his objection like a blade. I think I have a very clear idea. Should I start with the Montgomery Foundation's tax filings? Or would you prefer I begin with the fascinating connections between your media companies and certain political campaigns that seem to violate several federal election laws? The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Maya wasn't bluffing. During those 6 months of anxiety about meeting David's family, she had done what any good journalism student would do: research. What she'd found in public records, tax filings, and corporate documents had kept her awake at night. You know what I found most interesting, Mr. Montgomery? The pattern of your media outlets endorsing specific political candidates right after those candidates voted on legislation that benefited your other business interests. Completely coincidental, I'm sure. Charles started to stand, his face flushed with rage, but Maya held up her hand. Oh, please, don't get up on my account. I'm not finished. See, I also found it fascinating how the Montgomery Foundation, your charitable organization that supposedly helps underprivileged youth, seems to spend more money on administrative costs and executive salaries than it does on actual charitable work. Almost like it exists primarily as a tax shelter rather than to help people like me. Eleanor looked horrified. Several family members were exchanging shocked glances. David looked like he was watching a natural disaster unfold. But you know what really caught my attention? Maya's voice was gaining momentum now, fueled by months of suppressed anger and the adrenaline of finally fighting back. The really interesting part was discovering how your newspapers killed stories about environmental violations by companies you have investments in. How investigations into labor practices at your overseas factories somehow never made it to print. How journalists who asked too many questions about Montgomery family business interests found themselves suddenly unemployed. Maya took a step closer to the table, her eyes never leaving Charles's face. That's corruption, Mr. Montgomery. Using your media empire to protect your financial interests while pretending to serve the public good. Using your charitable foundation as a tax dodge while lecturing others about responsibility. Using your wealth and influence to silence people who try to hold you accountable. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the servers had stopped moving. And you know what the most disgusting part is? Maya's voice was quiet now, but it carried clearly to every person in the room. You have the audacity to sit here and call me street garbage while you profit from the exact kind of corruption that keeps people in the streets. You lecture me about values while you build an empire on lies and exploitation. Charles finally found his voice, and when he spoke, it was with barely controlled fury. You have no proof of these accusations. You're a student with delusions of grandeur, making wild claims. Am I? Maya interrupted. Because I have copies of some very interesting documents. Financial records. Internal emails, correspondence between your editors and your business managers about which stories to bury. Maya had spent 2 months gathering this information, using every skill her journalism professors had taught her. She'd filed Freedom of Information Act requests. She'd cross-referenced public records. She'd found sources and verified information. She'd built a case. You want to know what street garbage looks like, Mr. Montgomery? It looks like using your power to silence the truth. It looks like exploiting workers while pretending to be a pillar of the community. It looks like calling a young woman trash because she threatens your comfortable world of unchallenged privilege. Maya's voice was strong and clear, carrying conviction of someone who had finally found her moment to speak truth to power. I may have grown up poor, but I've never stolen from charity. I may work multiple jobs, but I've never silenced journalists to protect my investments. I may be wearing a borrowed dress, but at least I've never borrowed someone else's integrity. Charles was on his feet now, his face purple with rage. How dare you? How dare I what? Maya shot back. How dare I research public records? How dare I ask questions about a man who's been attacking me all evening? How dare I defend myself against someone who called me street garbage? Maya looked around the room at David's family, her borrowed dress wine-stained but her dignity intact. Here's what I dare, Mr. Montgomery. I dare to believe that the truth matters more than your reputation. I dare to believe that corruption should be exposed regardless of how powerful the corrupt person is. And I dare to believe that a woman from the streets has just as much right to love your son as anyone else at this table. Maya turned to David, who was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, part shock, part admiration, part terror at what she'd just unleashed. David, I love you, but I won't be part of a family that thinks crushing people beneath them is acceptable. I won't pretend your father's behavior tonight was anything other than cruel and bigoted. And I won't keep quiet about corruption just because confronting it makes people uncomfortable. She looked back at Charles, who was trembling with rage. You call me street garbage, Mr. Montgomery, but at least garbage can be cleaned up. Corruption like yours rots everything it touches from the inside out. Maya picked up her purse, her movements calm and deliberate despite the chaos she'd just created. Thank you for dinner, Eleanor. It was lovely to meet you. Simone, I'll return your dress as soon as possible, and I'm sorry about the wine stain. She started toward the door, then paused and looked back at Charles one more time. Oh, and Mr. Montgomery, you might want to call your lawyers, because this street garbage is about to become a very big problem for your empire. Maya walked out of that dining room with her head held high, leaving behind a family in complete chaos and a man who had just realized that he'd picked a fight with the wrong woman. Behind her, she could hear shouting, could hear David calling her name, could hear Eleanor trying to restore calm to a situation that was beyond repair. But Maya didn't look back. She had finally found her voice, had finally stood up to the kind of power that had intimidated her for months. Charles Montgomery had tried to break her by attacking everything she valued most. Instead, he had given her the weapon she needed to destroy everything he'd built his identity on. Maya's story exploded into the headlines 3 weeks later. Media mogul's empire built on corruption read the front page of the Washington Post. Maya's investigation, expanded and verified by a team of professional journalists, detailed years of ethical violations, tax fraud, and the systematic suppression of stories that would have damaged Montgomery business interests. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Federal investigators launched probes into the Montgomery Foundation's finances. The SEC opened an investigation into potential securities fraud. 3 different district attorneys began examining possible criminal charges. But the real devastation came from something Charles Montgomery had never expected. His own family's reaction to learning the truth about the empire they'd benefited from. Eleanor Montgomery, the woman who had welcomed Maya so warmly, issued a public statement through her lawyer expressing her shock and disgust at the revelations about her son-in-law's business practices. She announced that she was severing all financial ties with Montgomery Enterprises and establishing an independent foundation dedicated to supporting investigative journalism. Simone went further. In a television interview that went viral within hours, she spoke about growing up in a family where wealth was more important than integrity, where questions were discouraged and loyalty was demanded without being earned. Maya Johnson showed more courage in one evening than I've shown in my entire life, Simone said, looking directly into the camera. She stood up to corruption and power, and she'd paid a price for it. But she was right, and I'm ashamed that it took someone from outside our family to hold us accountable for what we become. David's response was more complicated. The night of the dinner, he had followed Maya out of the house, catching up with her in the circular driveway as she waited for the car service she'd called. Maya, wait, he'd said, his voice strained with emotion. What you just did in there. I destroyed any chance of your family accepting me, I know, Maya had replied, not looking at him. I'm sorry, David. I tried to keep quiet, but he pushed and pushed until... You were magnificent, David had interrupted, turning her to face him. Maya, you were absolutely magnificent. What my father said to you was unforgivable. What he's been doing with his business empire is unforgivable. You stood up to him when no one else in my family ever has. Maya had searched his face for any sign that he resented what she'd done, that he blamed her for the chaos she'd unleashed. Instead, she saw pride, love, and something that looked like relief. "Are you sure?" she'd ask quietly. "Because I just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the country, and he's your father." David pulled her into his arms right there in front of the house, where she'd just brought his world crashing down. He stopped being my father the moment he called a woman I love street garbage. David had said firmly, "Maya, I've been watching him use his power to hurt people my entire life, and I never had the courage to stand up to him. You did in one night what I should have done years ago." The weeks that followed were brutal. Charles Montgomery used every resource at his disposal to try to discredit Maya's investigation. Private investigators dug into her background. Lawyers sent threatening letters. Anonymous sources planted stories suggesting she was an opportunist who had seduced David to gain access to family secrets. But Maya had done her homework too well. Every document was authentic. Every source was verified. Every allegation was supported by evidence that could withstand scrutiny. More importantly, Maya had something Charles Montgomery had never possessed: credibility born from integrity. The journalism community rallied around her. Professors who had taught her wrote op-eds defending her work. Classmates organized social media campaigns supporting her. The bookstore where she worked part-time put up a sign reading, "We're proud of our Maya," that drew customers from across the city. 6 months after the dinner that changed everything, Charles Montgomery resigned from the boards of his companies amid federal investigations that would eventually result in criminal charges. His media empire was sold off piece by piece to pay legal fees and settlements. Maya graduated summa cum laude and was immediately hired by the Washington Post based on the strength of her Montgomery investigation. Her first assignment was covering political corruption, a beat where her willingness to ask uncomfortable questions about powerful people made her invaluable. David made his own difficult choice. Rather than inherit a business built on corruption, he used his trust fund to establish a foundation focused on supporting ethical journalism and providing legal defense for whistleblowers who expose corporate malfeasance. "My family's money was earned through exploitation," he explained to Maya one evening as they walked through the same neighborhood where they'd had their first conversation about his background. "The least I can do is try to use it to protect people who are fighting the kind of corruption my father represented." Maya and David's relationship had been tested by the ordeal, but emerged stronger. They had learned that they shared something more valuable than romantic compatibility, a commitment to truth and justice that transcended family loyalty or social pressure. A year later, Maya published a book about her experience called Street Garbage, a young woman's fight against power and corruption. It became a bestseller and established her as one of the most promising investigative journalists of her generation. The book's dedication read, "To my mother, who taught me that dignity comes from how you treat others, not how they treat you. And to everyone who has ever been called names by people who mistake wealth for worth." Charles Montgomery never recovered from the scandal. Stripped of his empire and facing multiple criminal charges, he became a cautionary tale about the corrosive effects of unchecked power and privilege. But Maya Johnson became something else entirely. Proof that courage and integrity could triumph over wealth and influence, that someone from the streets could hold the most powerful people accountable, and that sometimes the people who call you garbage are the ones who fear your strength the most. The last chapter of Maya's book described a moment when Charles Montgomery called her street garbage in a borrowed dress. "He thought he was delivering a killing blow," Maya wrote. "He thought he was putting me in my place and showing everyone in that room that I didn't belong in his world. What he actually did was show me exactly who I was and what I was capable of. He tried to use my background as a weapon against me, but instead, he reminded me that my background was my greatest strength. I am from the streets. I did grow up poor. I was wearing a borrowed dress. And none of that made me less worthy of respect, less deserving of love, or less capable of holding corrupt people accountable for their actions. Charles Montgomery called me street garbage because he thought it would break me. Instead, it freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. Someone who refuses to be silenced, someone who fights for truth regardless of the cost, and someone who knows that real class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. That night in the Hamptons, I learned that the most dangerous person is someone like Charles Montgomery isn't another billionaire or a powerful politician. It's an ordinary person who refuses to be intimidated, who asks the right questions, and who has nothing to lose by telling the truth. I was street garbage in a borrowed dress, and I brought down an empire. 5 years later, Maya and David were married in a small ceremony at the community center where Maya had served breakfast throughout college. Eleanor Montgomery walked Maya down the aisle, having formed an unlikely but deep friendship with a young woman who had forced her family to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Simone was the maid of honor. Maya's mother and sister sat in the front row, proud of the woman who had never forgotten where she came from or who had supported her journey. Charles Montgomery was not in attendance. He was serving time in federal prison for tax fraud and corruption charges that stemmed directly from Maya's investigation. During their wedding reception, Maya gave a toast that brought tears to every eye in the room. "They say you can judge people by how they treat those who can do nothing for them," Maya said, raising her glass. "David fell in love with me when I was nobody special, just a student working 3 jobs and trying to make something of herself. His family taught me that not everyone sees the world that way. But they also taught me something more important, that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost, even when the cost seems too high to pay. I used to think that coming from nothing was something to overcome. Now I know it's something to be proud of, because when you've had to fight for everything you've achieved, when you've learned to recognize real value versus artificial worth, when you understand what truly matters because you've lived without it, that's not a disadvantage. That's a superpower. To everyone here who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or called names by people who think money makes them better than you are not street garbage. You are not less than anyone else. And you have more power than you realize to change the world one truth at a time." The applause was thunderous, but Maya wasn't finished. "And to Charles Montgomery, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for showing me exactly what I was capable of. Thank you for teaching me that the truth is more powerful than money, that integrity matters more than approval, and that sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is underestimate you completely." Maya raised her glass higher. "Here's to borrowed dresses, street garbage, and the dangerous power of people who refuse to stay in their place." As the celebration continued around them, David pulled Maya aside. "Any regrets?" he asked, gesturing toward a room full of family, friends, and colleagues, a room notably absent of billionaires and their corrupt empires. Maya looked around at the faces of people who had supported her journey. Her mother, who had worked multiple jobs to give her opportunities. Her sister, who had encouraged her to be brave. Eleanor, who had chosen truth over family loyalty. Simone, who had found her own courage. And David, who had proven that love was stronger than family pressure. "Not a single one," Maya said firmly. "This is exactly where I belong." And as Maya Johnson, now Maya Montgomery, danced with her husband in the same community center, where she had once served breakfast to people society had forgotten, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been called street garbage by one of the most powerful men in America. She had turned that insult into the motivation that brought down his entire corrupt empire. She had proven that dignity, courage, and integrity were worth more than all the money in the world. And she had learned the most important lesson of all, that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who are most afraid of your potential to become great. Maya Johnson had started as nobody special, just a young woman from a modest background who fell in love with someone whose world seemed impossibly different from her own. But she ended as exactly what Charles Montgomery had feared most. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated or silenced. Someone who refused to accept that power and money made anyone better than anyone else. Someone who proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. And someone who taught the world that when someone calls you street garbage, the best response isn't to prove them wrong. It's to show them exactly how powerful street garbage can be. And that's Maya's incredible story. A young woman who was supposed to be crushed by wealth and power instead became the force that brought an entire corrupt empire to its knees. Her story proves that courage, integrity, and a refusal to be intimidated can overcome even the most entrenched privilege and corruption. If Maya's story moved you, if it reminded you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to back down, then this channel needs your support. Subscribe right now, because we're committed to telling stories about real people who stand up to power, who fight for truth, and who prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter in the description below. We share the deeper stories there, the follow-ups and behind-the-scenes details that complete these incredible journeys. Because stories like Maya's, stories about courage triumphing over corruption, about love surviving family pressure, about someone called street garbage who changed the world, these stories need to be told, remembered, and shared. Hit subscribe. Sign up for the newsletter. And remember, you're never as powerless as powerful people want you to believe.